Hi, my name is Roy. I've been with Wix for the past 7 and then some years. As a long-time full-stack engineer, I really like building cool apps that people enjoy using. But my main stack in technology is the Node.js stack with TypeScript, with React, and with a myriad of other technologies that you probably know and maybe even share some of my lab for. And in my free time, I run a coffee shop. Well, not really. It would have been cool, but that's not really what I do. But say that I did run a coffee shop and say that it was getting successful. My next obvious step would be to take it online. I would create a Wix site with Wix stores so I can sell my coffee merchandise to everyone who's interested in coffee. I started getting a lot of questions because the site was getting so popular. Important questions like, what's better, Arabica or Robusta? Or what's the difference between a French and an AeroPress? And so on and so forth. Now, everyone who's into coffee can tell you that it's a rabbit hole and that once you go in, it's really hard to find your way out. And so I found myself spending more time answering questions than actually serving coffee. This needed to change. And then I remembered, hey, I'm also a full stack engineer. Lucky for me. So I'm planning to create a widget for my site that will answer questions on my behalf about coffee. Now, with the power of React.js and AI, I'm going to turn my homepage into the first ever AI coffee shop. People will ask my AI barista their questions, and then it will return not only with the answer, but also with a list of products for my selection that they can buy with a click of a button. I'm going to power my widget using OpenAI's GPT-4o, and I'm going to use the beta parse API, which will allow me to not only define the instructions, but also the schema of the output that I'm expecting to get back from it. Finally, there are a few ways to build widgets for Wix. There's Wix Blocks, which is the visual editor. I can also host my widget on my own server and serve it via an iframe. It's called self-hosted. But since I'm a React developer, I'm going to use the solution called the Wix CLI, which is, in essence, our own React meta framework for building apps for Wix. So today we're going to go on the journey for the perfect cup, or how to build an AI coffee shop using Wix CLI and the OpenAI API. Let's get started. So this is my site. Much like any other e-commerce site, as we said, it uses Wix stores. And people who go on my site can see the selection of products, the catalog on the site itself, where I, on the other end, manage the catalog from the Wix dashboard. We also have the Wix Studio editor, which allows us to design a website. And that's where we're going to get started from. This is the editor. This is our website. We can see that we all know Wix. We all know that we can just drag and drop items into the Wix editor to design our site. And what we want to build today is a site widget, which is an element that we can drag and drop in our site, just like we did with that specific button. And we're going to get started with the Wix CLI. So let's head to our terminal and run the first command, yarn create Wix app. Now it's going to take a couple of seconds to get started. Now we're going to create a new Wix app for our new widget. We're going to start from an empty template. And the name is going to be Amazing AI Barista. Let's do this. Great. So now that we have our project set up, you can see that we have suggestions for the next steps. But we're just going to open the project in VS Code. OK, great. So we can see that just like any other meta framework, Wix CLI is file-based. So when we have different elements that we create, we can find them under the relevant directories. So we can see that under the source directory, we have the dashboard, pages, and an React element for the page. Now, these are pages that we use on the Wix dashboard. That's where the site owners can manage their apps. But we don't want to build that. We're going to build a widget. Before we do, let's learn about the development environment so we can run yarn dev in our console. it will start our developer environment. And when you start it for the first time, you need to pick a website. We're going to select the sophisticated kettle. It's going to install the app on our website. We're going to agree to that. Now that we're done, we could go back to the CLI. And we can see that our development environment is up and running. Now, in order for us to see something inside the Wix Studio editor, we need to create our first widget. So let's do that. We're going to run yet another command called yarn generate. Now this time we can select an extension from a list of extensions. We have three main categories: dashboard, site, and backend. We're going to focus on site, but later on we're going to see other extensions as well. And we're going to create a site widget. We're going to name it AI Barista widget and install dependencies. We have 4 files here: element JSON, module CSS, element TSX, and panel TSX. Right now, we're going to focus on the element.tsx file. This is the file that contains our element, the one that we want to see inside the Wix Studio editor. So we can see that it's a very simple React component. Hello, Wix CLI, open this and that file to start building your widget. Let's run yarn dev once again. Now it's installing our app. And once we scroll down here, we can see that a widget shows up right here. Now, this is our local development version of the widget. It means that whenever we make changes, we have HMR, hot module replacement, and it's going to update our widget in place inside the Wix Studio editor. So for the anatomy of widgets, we have 2 widget files. One is the element file, and the other is the panel file. Now, why is that? The widget file is used to define the component, the element that we're going to see inside the editor. It can fully use React with state, context, and props. Now, if you ask yourself, where do these props come from? You ask the right questions, because the props come from this settings panel. Now, through the settings panel, we can wire it to our component. So when we make changes through the settings panel, they are reflected through the props of our React component. Right, so let's do that. We can go back to our code. We can see that when we make some changes, as we said before, the changes are reflected immediately in the editor. And we can also see that now when we start the development environment, we can open the editor directly from the CLI. Now, we're not going to do any sort of high and low level CSS and images here. We prepared 2 components in advance and we're going to use them. So let me just copy them into our workspace. So we have some assets, some images, GIFs, fonts, etc. And we have 2 main components. One of them is chat prompt and the other is chat results. And we want to use the chat prompt in our code. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to update our custom element to render this chat prompt. We're going to import it. We're going to initialize a new state for the question. And we can see that this prompt expects a title prop. Now, this obviously is a TypeScript error because we never defined this in the props interface. So we're going to change it right here. We're going to save it. We're going to see that it's reflected in the editor. And it is. So we have the widget here. Let's make sure that we replace everything in this section with our widget. So we're going to take our widget over here. We're going to make sure that it's stressed all across this section. Make sure that it covers the entire area, 100%. Okay, looks like we're good to go, but there's one thing missing. There is no title. So let's see how we can wire our settings panel to the props of this React component. Handing back to this file, let's also remove this import. we can see that we have this short adapter called React to Web Component. This adapter transforms our React component into a web component, which the Wix Studio editor knows how to interact with. So we have the list of props here. It's no longer display name, it's going to be title. And we're going to tell it that the title is of type string, which means that we're going to expect a prop of type string from the settings panel. Now let's head to the panel file and also make this smaller. Right, now here in the panel file, we can see that it's yet another React component. It already has some default components inside of it. We can see it in the Wix Studio editor if we click on settings. So we can see that we have the settings panel here, your name and an empty string. So let's see how it works. So first of all, the components, they come from a component library called Wix Design System. These are the native Wix components that you can use out of the box, and their style matches the one of the editor and the dashboard. And we can also see that we have an access to a widget API. The widget API comes from the Wix editor package, and it allows our component to interact directly with the editor and tell it what are the props of the widget. So we can see that when we mount the component, we get the prop called display name and set it to our state. And when we update our state, we set the prop back into display name. So let's change it so that instead of name, we're going to have title. And instead of the display name API call, we'll have set get prop title and set prop title right over here. Let's save it. And let's see if anything changed. So we can already see that the settings panel has changed, and now it has title inside of it. And we can make changes to the title, right? When we make the changes, they are immediately reflected in the widget. So let's just keep it welcome to the first AI coffee shop. Now that we have everything set up, the next thing would be to actually create our AI response. Before we start writing the code, let's review the flow that we want to create. So we have a site visitor on our site. They're going to input their question, and they're going to provide us with a question about coffee. Now we want two other things for our model to work. The first is a set of instructions. You are a helpful barista. Your job is to do this and that. And the other, for context, is the list of products that we have on our website. So we're going to use the Wix Stores API to pull the list of products from the website. And we're going to take everything and feed it to GPT-4o using the OpenAI API. We're going to tell it to return a response in a JSON format that contains both the answer for the question and a list of relevant products. We're going to take all of this and send it back to the site visitor so they can see the response, the answer, and select the products to buy. Now, doing all of that in the client side, don't do that. It's too much logic, and we don't store API keys on the client side, and we need an API key to interact with OpenAI. Instead, we want to run this code on the backend, and we're going to use yet another feature of the CLI called an API extension. So let's close our developer environment and run yarn generate once again. Now we can see that we have dashboard, site, but also backend. Under backend, we have three main options: API, event, and service plugins. Events are functions that are called when a certain event happens in the system, like someone installed your app or a new product was added. A service plugin is a type of function that replaces an existing logic. Say that you have your own shipping service and you want to replace the existing one. You can implement a service plugin. But we're going to go with API, which is essentially a function that we can call using REST. So we're going to create the API. We're going to call it Ask Barista. And that's it. We can find our new API extension under backend, API, Ask Barista, API. And we can see that we have two exported functions here. One is get and one is post. We can export functions named after HTTP methods. And when someone makes a request using the respective HTTP method, they will call the specific function that we implemented or get a 404 back from us. Now, every function gets a request object as an input. This is the standard request object from the Fetch API, nothing new here. And it returns a response object as an output, which again is the standard response object from the Fetch API. Now, we don't want to accept just any type of input. We want users to be able to make post calls to us, and we want to be able to validate the requests that they make. So first of all, we're going to remove the get function. And then we're going to need some sort of schema validation to make sure that the request looks okay. So we're going to use Zod, which is an open source library that specializes in schema validation. So yarn add Zod. Import Z from Zod. And let's define the request schema. Right, so we have the ask_barista request schema. It's an object with a question property of type string, min length 3, max length 512, and this is the question to ask. Now let's define the schema of the output. So we have ask_barista response schema, but here we have two properties. The first is the answer, which is in plain text, and the second is related products, which is an array of objects, each containing product name, product ID, and product image. We're also going to export the type of the response schema as a type so we can later on use it from our client. Now, if we want to use the Wix Stores API, we're going to need to use the Wix Stores SDK. So we have a developer website, dev.wix.com, and it has everything about any kind of API that we haven't exposed. So we're going to start with Stores, Products API, and in the setup, they just tell us to yarn add Wix Stores. So let's do that. Now, what we want from the Products API is to get a list of all of our products. For that, we have a function called query products. And we can see that in order to use it, we're just going to import products from Wix Stores, await products.query products.find, and it will return everything. We can also add filters. We can also add filters on top of those requests, but we're not going to need that because we just want everything. So let's go back to our post function here and make some changes. The first is to use the request schema to parse the body of the request. The second is to use the products.query products API to get a list of all the products. And right now, before we dive into integrating with OpenAI, we just want to sort of do a health check. So we're just going to return a stub response where the answer is answer to the question with the question, and the related products is arbitrarily the first product we got back from Wix Stores. And then we're just going to return it. Now, how are we going to test this function in production? Obviously from calling it from our widget. So let's see how we can interact with those APIs from our widget. Going back to site, widgets, element.tsx, we're going to think about what kind of client we want to use in order to make the request. Now, we could use fetch, which is a standard way of making requests in the world. But what about authorization headers? What about all the other things we need to make sure that exist before sending the request? That's why we have yet another package from Wix called Wix Essentials. And it has it's a very small package with a few utility functions. One of them is called HTTP client. And HTTP client exposes a fetch-like API called fetch with auth that you can use just like you would with fetch, but it already has all the headers and authorization tokens set up for you. So let's start by installing Wix Essentials, yarn add Wix Essentials. And now we're going to import HTTP client from Wix Essentials. So from Wix Essentials. And now that we have that, we can implement our submit question function. So this is the function. we can see that we await HTTP client.fetch with auth, and we have this URL. Now, this URL contains an environment variable called base API URL. This is the base URL of our server, and it will always be populated with the right URL, no matter in what environment you run. So we access it through import meta and base API URL, and then ask barista, which is the name of our function, our API extension. We're going to use the post method, and the body is going to be the question, and then we're going to run console log on the response. Now, one last thing is we're going to wire it to our chat prompt component. So let's wire it, submit question, and start our dev environment. Perfect. You can try to interact with the component, but we can't really do that because in the editor, it's read-only. And if you want to use the component, we need to publish our site. So let's click publish. Great, congratulations. And now if we restart our dev environment, we'll have the option to start the dev environment inside our live site. So now we can press S on the keyboard and it will open our site. Nice. Let's open the console. How to coffee. Let's see what we get. Okay, we got an answer. Answer to the question, how to coffee, related products, the arbitrary product that we got first from the Wix Stores API. Great. So now that we integrated with Wix Stores, what we have left to do is to integrate with OpenAI and get a meaningful response. Let's learn a little bit about how basically modern LLMs work. So in essence, they're just sophisticated autocomplete machines, like when you write something on your phone and then there's this little keyboard that suggests the next word. That's basically GPT, but instead of specific words, the next word in a sentence, it tries to guess the next message in a chain text. So our input is the message from the user. The user asks how much is 1 + 1, and then GPT tries to predict what the answer is going to look like. In this case, it will answer 2. Then you might ask yourself, okay, how do we provide instructions to the model if it's just a chat simulator? And the answer is that we have 3 types of messages. We have user messages, we have AI messages, and we have system messages. System messages are used as sort of an internal monologue for the model. With them, we can tell it what the instructions are. In our case, we tell it to operate in binary, and then the user asks how much is 1 + 1, and this time the answer would be 10 because we gave it the instruction to operate in binary. Now, this is a very simple explanation of how they work. It's much more complicated than that, but for our purposes, it's really enough. And those 2 messages, the system and the user message, in our case, are what we call the prompt. We can think of system messages as sort of the code that defines the function, and the user messages as the input that we give to the function. Now, what should be in our set of instructions for GPT-4o? The first thing is your role. You are a barista. The second is your purpose. You need to provide advice and purchase recommendations. Some details. If you want it to be a barista, let's give some details about specific beverages, specific machines, specific methods of making coffee, and so on and so forth. And then we need some restrictions. You can answer only questions related to coffee. Otherwise, don't answer. Then we have context. In our case, the context is a list of available products we got from Wix Stores. And finally, since we're going to use the new parse API, we're going to also define the expected format of the output that we get back from GPT-4o. Let's do that. We're going to head back to our API extension right here, and we're going to add a new function called prompt that, given the list of products, returns a wall of text that tells the model what to do. So this is the prompt function. You get a list of products. You are a highly knowledgeable AI barista specializing in all things coffee. Your purpose is to provide expert advice and recommendations based on the following topics. And then the list of topics, provide tailored recommendations from the curated list of products. And if the query is unrelated to coffee or the product list, reply with, I'm sorry, I can only answer questions related to coffee. Finally, we take the list of products from Wix stores, and for each product, we provide the model with the name of the product, the ID, the image, and the description, so it can select the relevant product and return it in its response. Now that we have the prompt, we need to integrate with OpenAI. Now, OpenAI have their own SDK, and we're going to add it. Yarn add OpenAI. And we need to create a new OpenAI client instance. So we're going to write const OpenAI equals new OpenAI. And we're going to need to provide the API key. But what is this API key? This is a secret that we created on the OpenAI developer website, and we want to use it in our code. Now, the one thing you never want to do is to put your secrets inside your code. We're instead going to use an environment variable for that. So I also have a .env file prepared for us in advance. And it has a environment variable called with OpenAI API key. Now we can access this environment variable via import.meta.env, just like we got the base URL for the client. And it's going to be with OpenAI API key. Now that we have our API key, with that, let's make the request to OpenAI. So first of all, we're going to modify the entire way we build the response. Instead of writing this hard-coded response, we're going to replace it with this call to ChatGPT, to GPT-4o, more precisely. We're going to use the OpenAI beta chat completion parse API, select the model GPT-4o mini. The messages are going to be the system message, which is the prompt we create using this function. And the user message, which is just the message the user sent us. Since we limited it to 512 characters, we can say that it's not going to be too long for the model to process. Now, we can also define a response format, and lucky for us, OpenAI has a utility function called Zod response format. We're going to import that as well without extensions. And this, in essence, takes our ask barista response schema, the schema that we defined here, and tells OpenAI to respond in the format of this schema. Now that we saved it, let's go back to our site. We can see that it was reloaded. How to brew an Americano. Might take a couple of seconds. And we got an answer. To brew an Americano, start by preparing a shot of espresso using your espresso machine and related products, Consoir X1, which is an espresso machine, Brew Classic 9000, and Italian espresso blend, which is a blend of coffee. Okay, great. Now we don't want our users to open the console to get a response. We want to show it on the screen. So let's do that. Lucky for us, we have another component we have in advance here, ready for us, set results. So we're going to modify our site widget, go back to element, and we're going to modify the submit question function right here. So instead of just logging the response, it will put it inside a state. So let's start by adding 2 new states, is loading and results. The results type is the type we exported from the API extension file. And now we're going to modify submit question to fill in those states. So it started by set is loading to true, makes the request, and then uses the response JSON to fill in the result state and set is loading false. Finally, we want to render that. So we're just going to add an if statement in our component that if we're loading or we have results, we're going to use chat results with the state, question, and results we got from the request. Now, let's save it, and let's see that it works. How to brew or what blend to use for Vietnamese coffee. Okay, we got a response for Vietnamese coffee. The Vietnamese blend special is an excellent choice. And we can see that we have the Vietnamese blend special from our catalog right over here with a button, add to cart. Now this button does nothing right now, and we want to make it work. So the final thing we're going to do is we're going to use the Ecom APIs. Ecom and stores are not the same APIs because Ecom is everything related to e-commerce, to transactions, purchases, cart management, and so on and so forth. And Wix Stores is just one of the clients of the many clients of the Ecom platform. And you, by the way, you can build your own Ecom app and use the Ecom platform to handle your transactions as well. The first one is the cart API from the Wix Ecom package. So let's install Wix Ecom. We're going to use the create cart API to create a new cart and populate it with the items we got back from GPT. And the second API we want to use is site ecom. Now, the difference between ecom and site ecom is that ecom makes requests to the ecom server. Site ecom are a set of local browser APIs that you can use in the context of the site to run some actions inside the site, inside the browser. And we're going to use a function called navigate to cart page, which in essence will just take us to the cart page once we've populated our cart. So we're going to install Wix site ecom as well, yarn add Wix site ecom. And now let's implement a new function called onClick add to cart. It will set the state of is loading to true. It will use the cart API from Wix Ecom to create a new cart where the line items are going to be the products that we got back from the results. And we can see that for each product, we're using the product ID, but we also use an app ID. This app ID is Wix Stores because we want to tell Ecom to specifically go and take this product from the Wix Stores catalog. You don't have to remember this ID by heart. It's all in the documentation. And finally, we're going to use the Ecom from the site Ecom package. We're going to use Ecom navigate to cart page. Let's wire it to the chat results component. On click add to cart, and fingers crossed that everything works. Right. How to brew an espresso this time. So we got our response, we got the espresso cup, we got the consumer machine. Let's click add to cart and hope that everything works. And ready to check out. And I think that's basically it. That's how our AI barista works. And now, what's our takeaways from this presentation? The first, and the thing I want you to take away with you from here today is that you can use Wix Studio with React hand in hand. You don't have to choose either. You can do all of it, mainly using the Wix CLI, which is a React meta framework and uses all the technologies we all already know and love. But also, it allows you to focus on your code. You don't have to worry about logistics, about deployment, about hosting. Everything is done for you. You just have to write your code in a very straightforward manner. And finally, we saw that the widget we built here today was for my own imaginary website. But you can build those widgets, you can build those API extensions and every other type of extensions and wrap it up nicely in an app and even sell it on the Wix app market for others to use and enjoy. Now, if you think that what we did here today was interesting, you can head over to dev.wix.com. We have everything laid for you over there, and it's really easy to get started, especially if you're already familiar with React and TypeScript. And that's it for today, guys.